This week on the Discover the Word podcast, best-selling author Leslie Leyland Fields joins the group to talk about Following Jesus. We're calling this week Follow Me, Insights from a Fisherwoman About Following Jesus.
There was a time I tried to unfollow Jesus. Just a little backstory. I was living on this remote island in Alaska, and we were commercial fishing, and there just came a point when it was too hard, and I tried to walk away. In fact, I did. I got a backpack, I filled it with food and water and a gun for bears, and I walked off the island down to a cabin 4 miles away. And I was there for several days just wrestling with God and wrestling with what it meant to follow Jesus.
And so be part of the group as Leslie explores with us what it was like for Jesus' first fishermen disciples to follow him, and shares with us 5 insights into ways God has equipped us to follow him as well. Insights from fisherwoman Leslie Leyland Fields about following Jesus on this Discover the Word podcast. And it is great to have you here for another hour of studying the Bible together on Discover the Word, the small group Bible study from Our Daily Bread Ministries. Regular group members Elisa Morgan, Bill Crowder, and Daniel Ryan Day are a part of the group this time. And we've connected via Zoom with author Leslie Leyland Fields at her home on Kodiak Island, Alaska. As you heard, they have a family fishing business there in Alaska, and that will come up often in these conversations. In fact, she asked, will it be a problem if you hear bush planes landing and taking off in the background? They fly right over our house. And we said, of course not. And so you may hear a bit of that. But Leslie also is an award-winning author, and her book, Crossing the Waters, is one that contains some of the ideas that we'll be exploring together this week. Ideas about following and unfollowing Jesus, and some ways God has equipped us to follow him and fulfill the Great Commission. So let's get started with Follow Me, Insights from a Fisherwoman about following Jesus.
Welcome, Leslie. Excited to have you.
Hey, I'm so glad to be here with all of you today.
I really enjoyed reading your book because I've always been a little bit fascinated by the fishing industry, especially up there in Alaska where it's pretty rugged. So how did you get into that?
Oh, I wish I had a really dramatic story, but it's the old story of young woman meets young man from Alaska at college, fall in love, get married. Ta-da, there I am on this island in the middle of nowhere.
Did you go to college in Alaska, Leslie?
No, I went to a Christian college in Ohio.
So girl meets boy goes to Alaska is still kind of what?
Yeah, it is. It is. Yeah, it's 5,000 miles away from where I grew up.
Wow. Well, but it's where you've been now for decades. You can share how many if you so choose, but it's
I'm fine with that. This will be, and I just counted it up just the other day, it will be my 44th season.
Fantastic. Fantastic. And growing up literally as a young adult into middle and advanced adulthood, the whole context of fishing has become really your context, and it's affected your understanding of following Jesus, as some of the disciples were fishermen. So anyway, I'm excited about our conversations that you're going to lead us through on this whole idea of following. I mean, you followed and followed and followed Jesus, as we all have. So where do you want to take us in these conversations?
Well, I think there's something kind of at the core of our conversations, and that is that no matter where you live, you don't have to live in Alaska to be called. Jesus charges us to follow him, and he gives us the most important job in the world, to go into all the world making disciples. But sometimes I just think, what are you doing, Jesus? You're asking us. You asked those disciples. Those guys were a mess. And he's asking us to follow him in this, what we call the Great Commission, to go into the world making disciples. So I want to take us through 5 sort of fear-shattering ways that God has equipped us to follow him and to fulfill the Great Commission.
You said fear-shattering, which implies that maybe there's some fears that we are familiar with that you're going to also draw our attention to, I'm guessing.
Yes, and I hope you're fearful. You should be. We all should be. Because what Jesus calls us to is immense. It's of eternal significance. And yet I think, oh, Jesus, what, you're calling me? Don't you know who I am? Don't you know how weak and imperfect I am?
Yeah, even if the thought for some people of acting on that command and actually doing it is fearful, for those of us for whom maybe the doing it isn't fearful, the sense of responsibility should be.
Yeah. So who are we starting with, Leslie?
Well, I would like to start with Simon Peter.
Okay.
I think many people find such a connection, heart connection with Peter, and I do as well. So I wonder if somebody has that passage in front of them, Luke 5:8, and then 10 and 11, the calling of Peter.
Sure, I'll be glad to read that. It says, when Simon Peter realized what had happened, he fell to his knees before Jesus and said, "O Lord, please leave me. I'm such a sinful man." In verse 10 and 11, Jesus replied to Simon, "Don't be afraid. From now on, you'll be fishing for people." And as soon as they landed, they left everything and followed Jesus.
So I want to just back up for a minute and maybe talk about it from our own lives. Here we live in such a competitive world, right? So one year I was applying to teach at a university, and I found out later I was competing with 200 other applicants. So, what do I do to qualify to get ready for this? I spent a week or 2 weeks on my resume. I just polished everything up, made myself look really good. It was all this stress. Only one person would be chosen out of 200. And we all know we live in this fiercely competitive world. If we want that job or want that position, what will we do? We'll clean up, we'll dress up, we'll cover our weaknesses. And it wasn't so different from that in Jesus's day, in Peter's time. There was all kinds of pressure to qualify, like even in the religious realm, in the synagogue schools. Who gets to advance? Only the smartest, the sharpest, the brightest. Only the best could follow a rabbi. So this is what blows my mind. When Jesus wanted to have followers, to have people join him in his mission to bring the gospel, where did he go? Well, any other rabbi would go to the synagogue school because that's where all the smart people were. Jesus did the opposite. He turned in the other direction down to the beach where the fishermen were drying their nets, mending their nets. It's an incredible thing right there. Where does he go?
It's almost like an illustration of what Paul wrote in 1 Corinthians 1, where he says, "For not many wise or mighty or well-known, but it's the weak things that confound the mighty and the nothing things that confound the something." It's almost like this is a living illustration of that idea.
Yeah, and it seems like also what we're subtly saying is that Peter didn't make the cut at some point. He was disqualified in some way, and so he's back to doing the family trade of fishing because at some point in his young life, he didn't measure up to whatever the standard was, and that's the reason that he is fishing in the first place.
Daniel, is that because all boys would go and be taught by rabbis, and then if they didn't cut it, they would find a different profession?
To my understanding, there was at least the pressure to memorize big chunks of what we now call the Old Testament. And so especially the Torah, the first 5 books, and then a lot of pressure to memorize other sections of Scripture. And then part of the testing process was for rabbis to ask lots of questions to see how well you not only internalized the memorization, but then how well you were able to interpret it as well. I don't know for sure that all young Jewish boys had the same access to follow a rabbi, but in some way, Peter is left out of that.
Leslie, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but it seems like all boys had the opportunity up until bar mitzvah. And once they became a son of the law, that was kind of the point where, okay, now the cream rises to the top and everybody else go get a job.
Yeah, I think that's right. And my favorite part of this story is the moment when Peter qualifies to become a disciple. And we just read that passage in Luke. And the backstory of that is Peter had been out fishing all night, had caught nothing. And so we see he's not even a good fisherman at this point, right?
Or at least doesn't feel like one.
Yeah. Brings his boat to shore, and there's Jesus, and Jesus asks him to, hey, put your boat back out. I want you to try again. And Jesus tells him to do all the wrong things from a fishing perspective. It's morning, the sun is out, and he tells him to, throw his net on the other side of the boat, this side of the boat probably where his shadow is over the water, and the fish can see the shadow. You can't catch fish like that.
Says the fisherwoman. Uh-huh.
Yes. But of course, the net explodes with fish, and then Peter is buried. And this is like his fishiest dream has just come true, right? It's the catch of a lifetime. And in that moment, he knows those fish came out of nowhere. He looks at Jesus. Jesus is there in the boat with him. And in that moment, he recognizes, who is this man? And he falls to his knees. And seeing the face of Jesus causes him to see into his own heart. And he sees his sin. And he said, Lord, you have to leave me. You have to go away from me. I am such a sinful man. And that's the moment when Peter qualifies to become a disciple. That's the moment when Jesus says, don't be afraid. From now on, you're going to come with me, and we're going to fish for people. So I find such hope in this moment that what Jesus is looking for is not this perfect resume. It's not, we don't even have to be a good fisherman. We don't have to be the best and brightest synagogue student who's memorized, the 5 books of the Torah. We just have to recognize our need and our nothingness, our emptiness. We have to recognize our sin.
Yeah, somebody said the ground's always level at the foot of the cross. So none of us are more qualified or less qualified. We're just all there in need.
Yeah, and it's also interesting, too, that in Peter's moment of looking at Jesus and say, go away from me, that's when Jesus moves closer to him and says, no, not only am I not going anywhere, but I want you to walk with me.
So we've just seen the calling of Peter, and Jesus said, I'm going to make you a fisher of people. And it says Peter did it. He dropped his nets and followed Jesus. So now my question is, all right, what's going to happen next? Okay, now Peter is following Jesus. So, surely life is going to be wonderful. It's just going to be all, happiness and joy. But very soon we are in the boat with all of the disciples in a massive storm. And these guys are going to die. So would somebody read this story? It's Mark 4:35-40.
I'll start it off, Leslie, and Elise and Daniel, if you guys want to jump in. Mark 4:35, and on that day, when evening had come, he said to them, let us go over to the other side. And leaving the multitude, they took him along with them just as he was in the boat, and other boats were with him.
And a furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped.
But he was in the stern, asleep on a cushion. And they woke him up and said to him, Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing? Jesus woke up and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, Peace, be still. Then the wind ceased, and there was a dead calm.
And he said to them, Why are you so timid? How is it that you have no faith?
Yeah, I love this story. I really connect with the story because I've been out in a lot of storms on the water in Alaska because I work in commercial fishing with my family, and we work out of boats that are just a little bit smaller than their boats. Their boats were somewhere between 25 and 30 feet, and ours are just a little bit smaller than that. And so one time in particular, I'll tell you this one story. I was in a boat alone on the water in winter in a snowstorm.
What is wrong with you?
Yeah, I know. And that's what my husband said too. So this blizzard just completely swallowed me up. And I was lost for, I don't even know how long it was. I tried not to panic. I could not see anything. I had no idea where I was for mile after mile. I kept looking for a beach to be able to land my skiff and just to wait out the storm, but there were no beaches. It was just cliff, 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 cliff. And then, just when I thought nothing could be worse, my engine died on me. Ooh. So now I'm dead in the water, very close to the cliff. Could be smashed against the cliff in minutes. And I realized I could die because Alaskan waters in the winter, of course, are very, very cold. If I go in the water, I will be dead in just a few minutes. And there's nobody around. People are many, many miles away. Mm. I was a Christian. I knew Jesus. I was like Peter and gave my life to follow Jesus just a few years before, and here I was fighting for my life. And so I shouldn't have been surprised. We know from the scriptures, we see in the scriptures that choosing to follow Jesus doesn't automatically end all storms in our lives. And I think sometimes we have that expectation, and sometimes we're shocked when it happens. And I don't know, have you had that experience of a storm in your life and you think, but wait, I'm a follower of Jesus. This shouldn't be happening.
Yeah. Now, Leslie, in the way you're asking the question, you're kind of saying that storms mean more than being stuck on a boat in the water in Alaska. So if I pick up what you mean by that, then the storms in my life that I have run into are experiencing sickness in our family that isn't going away, experiencing broken relationships with very, very close people to me that I haven't heard from or seen in a very long time, and that I can't reach out to try to fix those things. Mm-hmm. Those are some of the storms that, even though I am a Christian and I want to follow Jesus, those are the storms that I have run into.
Thanks, Daniel. That's so honest. And I echo that 1,000%. And some of mine, too, have been when life just goes contrary to what I would think God would allow. Mm-hmm. And I'm trying my best to serve him. And it's like the floor falls out from underneath me. Maybe it's a financial situation. Maybe it's a health situation, like you mentioned, or maybe it's choices of others that impact mine.
I think for me, the storms that are the worst are the ones that are the consequences of my own choices, because those are the ones you feel like, if only. Because,
back to what you were saying, Leslie, we think that if we're following Jesus, everything's going to turn out okay. But the reality is that God may forgive us for some of our choices, but he may not necessarily remove the consequences for some of our choices. So, yeah.
Yeah, and if we can just step back into that boat with the disciples for a few minutes just to understand the depth of their confusion and the depth of their fear and really angst, I want to say. So remember, Jesus is sleeping in the boat in the midst of the storm. And it says that the boat is about to swamp. So that means waves are washing over them. And there is no Coast Guard. They are not wearing life jackets. If they go into the water in this kind of storm, they will die, and they know it. And in the midst of that, Jesus is sleeping. There's one more detail that Mark tells us, that he's sleeping on a pillow, or another translation would be he's sleeping on a cushion. Yeah. So there are biblical scholars, who believe that it's actually a buoy for the sea anchor. And the sea anchor is the only thing they've got to give them a little bit of stability in the storm, in the waves. What you do is you throw that sea anchor over, and it'll just kind of slow you down. It just gives you a little bit of stability. So there's Jesus. He's not only asleep, but he's asleep on the one thing that might help them a little bit.
That's good. Wow.
And so I think we feel that sometimes, right? That frustration.
Yeah, and I think when you see this level of panic in their minds, and that they're professional fishermen who've spent their whole lives on the Sea of Galilee, I mean, that speaks itself to the intensity of the problem, because these are guys who've been there, done that. And yet here, there is a tangible anxiety that they're feeling. And then on top of that, it's just like Jesus is totally removed from that.
That's a good way to put it. If you are a strong fisherman and you look at this dude, you think, you don't understand that you're sleeping on the one thing we need. You're not only asleep, but you're sleeping on the one thing we need. You have no clue about fishing. And that's what we say to God sometimes, isn't it? You have no clue about my life.
Yeah, I think it also may be, and like so much of this is conjecture, but why is Jesus able to sleep in this moment? So much of the time he talks about this relationship he has with the Father where there's just this trust between the two of them that, my Father and I are one, and I abide in his love. And then Jesus invites us to abide in that same love. And so there's this like trust, this dependence that he has on the Father, that I wonder if that's the reason that he doesn't need the sea anchor and he can sleep on the cushion.
But also he can maybe, and you're right, Daniel, we're speculating now, but it also may be an indication of Jesus's humanity. That, he's been through a really difficult time of ministry where he's been expending himself to such a degree that even in the midst of the storm, he's knocked out just from actual human physical fatigue. And for the Jesus who walks on water, to see that Jesus, that weary perhaps, that he's sleeping in the middle of that storm, really makes Jesus feel very accessible to me.
That question of once we follow Jesus, does that mean all storms will end? We all are saying with a resounding, cry, no, we know there are going to be a lot of storms in our lives. And I think this story is so important to recognize that, Jesus does, and that storm, remember, he stands up and he rebukes the wind and the waves, and he says, peace, be still. The thing is that Jesus has calmed the one storm we absolutely cannot survive. And that's the storm of sin and death. And that's why Jesus came, to calm that storm, to end that storm once and for all. So I'm out there, right? I'm in the boat.
We got to hear what happened.
I'm about to, so I realized, okay, you might
Did you survive?
I don't know, do you want to know the end? I did. And the ending is really kind of amazing. I'm standing there in the boat. The boat is now dead. I'm just a few feet away from the cliff, and I just called out to God, like, Lord, help me. I'm at the end. There's nothing else I can do. And in that moment, the snow stopped, the fog lifted, I could suddenly see. Hadn't been able to see for an hour or two, and there, half a mile away, was a beach. There was one little beach that I could row to and be safe on. I rowed over to that beach. And, I have been in a number of other storms, literal storms and figurative storms. And the thing is, I know that even if I went in the water that day, another day I was in a plane that almost hit a mountain, I knew that even if I hit that mountain, even if I went in the water, I was still going to be safe. I was still going to be safe because Jesus was with me. And in those moments when I felt like I'm going to die, I had a profound calm entered my heart. And it was knowing that Jesus was with me. And knowing that if the plane hits the mountain, if I go into the water, it's okay, I'm still safe. Jesus has ended that one storm, that I cannot survive, that storm of sin and death and separation from God.
Yeah, if we know Jesus as our Savior, not even death can separate us from God's love. When we follow him, we are safe. He has calmed the one storm that we can't survive, the storm of sin and death. Well, another insight from our special guest for this episode, Leslie Leyland Fields. And this episode is titled, Follow Me, Insights from a Fisherwoman About Following Jesus. And when they continue, Leslie takes us to another passage and insight that is actually about unfollowing. The disciples all did that at least one point. Leslie shares about her struggle to unfollow. And I'm pretty sure everyone who's followed Christ has wrestled with that desire to unfollow at times. And so that insight comes up after this. Leslie Leyland Fields is an award-winning author, and during this episode of the Discover the Word podcast, we'd like to highlight one of her books titled Crossing the Waters. Now, this book was the winner of Christianity Today's 2017 Book Award for Christian Living and Discipleship. Now, Leslie lives on an island in the Gulf of Alaska, on a bay, an ocean bay about the same size as the Sea of Galilee, where she and her family have a commercial salmon fishing business. And she says she finds it amazing that Jesus chose fishermen as some of his first disciples. So in this book, Leslie takes you around her island and the waters where her family makes her living for the purpose of diving into the Gospels to follow the disciples as they follow Jesus. And in the process, she helps you discover that as you follow Jesus, you can count on him to rock your boat as you discover what it truly means to follow him. We'd encourage you to get a copy of Leslie's book, Crossing the Waters. We'll have a link in the show notes on our discovertheword.org website, or look for it on any of the online booksellers. That's Crossing the Waters by Leslie Leyland Fields. And now that conversation about when we want to unfollow Jesus.
I want to talk this time about a part of my story that in some ways is really hard to share, but I think it's important to share because I think we've all come to these points in our lives. And this is one of our connections with Peter and with the life of Peter. So there was a time, maybe 8 or 10 years into my marriage, when I tried to unfollow Jesus. When I tried to walk away from everything hard in my life. And just a little backstory, I was living on this remote island in Alaska, and we were commercial fishing, and my husband and I were working together. We were trying to work together, let me say that. And there just came a point when it was too hard, and I tried to walk away. In fact, I did. I got a backpack. I filled it with food and water and a gun for bears. And I walked off the island down to a cabin 4 miles away. And I was there for several days just wrestling with God and wrestling with what it meant to follow Jesus. I had said yes to Jesus about 10 years before as a teenager, but life was so hard, and it seemed like life got harder rather than easier in following Jesus.
Yeah, and a couple of questions in there. Well, this is silly, but how do you walk off an island? Is it like a peninsula or something?
Yeah, so there's at a low tide, there's a spit that I was able to walk off. That's a
Thanks.
great question.
See, you know the region, and I'm like, huh? The other thing is that I'm hearing, and thank you for your honesty, Leslie, in this time of unfollowing Jesus, it sounds like you were considering unfollowing commitments as well. It's like, I want to follow you, Jesus, but I don't want to be in this marriage or do this job or, be on this island or whatever it is. That's kind of how we manifest it at times. Is that what you're talking about a little bit?
Yes, absolutely. And sometimes we're just absolutely overwhelmed. Like, Jesus, how is this happening? Do you really love me? I think we question his love. And we question ourselves too. Lord, you chose me, but this is too hard. I can't do this. I don't want to do this anymore.
Yeah. It sounds a little bit like you've taken where we were in our last conversation, Leslie, when we were talking about storms in life and the fact that following Jesus isn't all hearts and flowers, but you've taken that to a different level, that this is not just the normal everyday troubles and trials of life. This is an experience that really is, I'd just rather step off the cliff kind of moment.
Yeah, and I wouldn't want to put words in your mouth, so please let me know if this isn't accurate, but it's almost like going from discouragement or fear or whatever in our last conversation, and this is almost like despair. Like something has to change, and it's kind of all building up and cascading together as I just need a change from everything.
And it's profound self-doubt and self-disillusionment that what's wrong with me, part of this is what's wrong with me, that I don't think I'm following Jesus well. And that's this deep connection that I feel with Peter on the night that Jesus was arrested and taken away. Peter had expressed this complete confidence, even if everyone falls away, not me. I am going to stick by your side, even till death. And so death suddenly appears, a threat appears. Jesus is arrested and hauled off. And how does Peter respond? The opposite of what he expected.
Yeah.
Right? He runs the other way. He flees for his life rather than trying to save Jesus's life. And I felt that same deep sense of disillusionment with myself. Like, why can't I follow better? Why can't I do this?
Yeah.
Theodore Roosevelt talked about, while daring greatly, to dare greatly, you run risks, and one of the biggest risks is failure. And I think all of us who've ever tried to do anything that felt a little bit beyond us know what it's like to fear failure. And yet, to make the promises that Peter made, and then to fail in the spectacular fashion that he did in the presence of Jesus himself, you can almost understand how shattering that would have been to him.
And we think he's going to get it right? Because he's the only disciple that's following Jesus from a distance even, right? They all ran away, and you have Peter at least that's kind of remotely close to Jesus, but then when the test really comes, when the pressure is really there, he walks away.
Of course, this isn't the end of the story. And that's why we wouldn't be sitting here today talking about this if the story ended there, right? So there's this incredible moment, these moments when something happens on a beach with fish and with bread. And this is in John 21. So we're going to go there in just a moment. I'll have somebody read that. But remember, Peter has fled from the events that are unfolding that horrific night. Jesus is arrested. He is hammered to the cross. He is buried, and he is resurrected. So Jesus has now risen from the dead, and here comes this scene on the beach. So could somebody read that?
Sure, I'll grab it. And just the context is the disciples had been out fishing, and they're returning. And this is where we pick it up in John 21. When they got there to the beach, they found breakfast waiting for them, fish cooking over a charcoal fire and some bread. "Bring some of the fish you've just caught," Jesus said. So Simon Peter went aboard and dragged the net to the shore. There were 153 large fish, and yet the net hadn't torn. "Now, come and have some breakfast," Jesus said.
And here's the thing. We think that when we say yes to follow Jesus, we think it's all on us. It's all about us. And that there's so much pressure to follow him perfectly, to follow him well, to never fail. And yet Peter had this colossal failure. I had this colossal failure. I ran away off my island, away from Jesus, saying, I don't even know if I want to follow you. I don't even know if I can follow you faithfully, Jesus. And yet Jesus comes after them. I mean, he comes with breakfast. He comes to serve them, and he feeds them love. He feeds them restoration. And that's similar to what happened for me down in that cabin where I was wrestling with God. Like, God, how can you love me? I am a failure. I'm trying to follow you. Jesus did meet me there. Didn't bring me fish. I had to go out and catch those myself later. But Jesus came with his love, with his courage. He enabled me to get up, pack my backpack, and walk back those 4 miles back to the island, back to restoration with my husband, back to recommitment, back to new growth and new life. And that's exactly what happened for Peter. And Jesus did the same thing for me in my moments of unfollowing him.
Yeah, you know what else is striking me too is Jesus is doing something that God is kind of known for throughout the whole story of the Bible. Like with Israel is in the wilderness without food, and one of the first things God does is provides food, provides water. Elijah runs away in fear, and the first thing that God does is not to deal with his fear, but to send an angel to make, the best I can tell, they were pancakes on a rock, right, and feeds him. And then Jesus, right, feeds the 5,000, feeds the 4,000, feeds his disciples at the last dinner before he dies. and then we see food here. It's almost like the first thing that God does when he meets us is he meets us in very practical, real ways. He's not just concerned about what's going on in our hearts and our souls. He's also concerned about physically what's going on with us and meeting all of those needs.
You even think about the Jewish tradition of Passover and how that meal itself is just kind of the focal point of all of Israel's history that they get to rehearse every year, and they do it over food.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so unexpected because you think about Peter and the disciples, they ran away, they deserted Jesus, and Jesus has the right to come back and maybe confront them, or at least address it. Why did you run away? Why? He doesn't say a word about that. He simply comes bringing food and love and restoration. Even when I fail, even when I feel like I have unfollowed or denied Jesus in some way, that he will never fail to come after me. So I think this is one of the profound truths about following Christ. When Jesus, called to us, come, follow after me. But it also meant that he would come after us, even in our weakest moments, even in the moments when we feel like we have failed him the most.
Yeah, following Jesus goes both ways. We follow him, and he follows us. Such a comforting reminder for times when we feel like we're stumbling in our Christian walk. Even when we try to unfollow Jesus, he still comes after us. That's a great insight in that conversation. This is the Discover the Word podcast with Elisa Morgan, Bill Crowder, Daniel Ryan Day, and special guest Leslie Leyland Fields, and an episode called Follow Me, Insights from a Fisherwoman About Following Jesus. And Leslie says this next insight flips our notions of success and power on their head. And so let's see what she means by that.
Hey everyone, it's great to be back. Thank you for this time together and this conversation.
It's good having you around because I don't know that I've ever actually talked about the Bible with a professional fisher person before.
Yeah, and I have a question about that because you've been talking about fishing in Alaska, and all I have in my head is Deadliest Catch. Is that the type of boat that you're on? Is one of those big, giant things? And
oh, you're going to be so disappointed. No, it's not quite that dramatic. It's, we're in small boats, like 25 to 28 foot boats, open. We call them skiffs. And we are on the ocean. We are out in the ocean, but we're not, those guys on the Deadliest Catch, they're fishing for crab, usually in the winter time. And they're way, way out in the middle of the ocean. We're close to shore. We're half a mile off the shore.
And what are you fishing for, Leslie?
Salmon.
And you use nets and stuff like that, right?
Yes. So we fish with nets, and our nets are attached to shore. So it's a different kind of fishing than most people imagine. There are actually 5 different gear types for fishing for salmon, and we're a particular gear type.
But, there's a lot of similarities to the New Testament fishing, and it's been awesome to look into some of these passages, but especially the characters that we're relating to of those who were choosing to follow Jesus and what that looked like for them on the water.
Yeah, and it's always been something that intrigued me. Of the 12 disciples, it's very likely that 6 of them were fishermen. And so that's always a question. Why did he choose fishermen? And so that's what was part of the prompt for me to dig into this book and really explore that question.
Do you think it's because fishermen by nature are just really easy to get along with and nice people?
There you go.
That's not why he chose that. That is not quite. Fishermen there is this profile. I think they're super hardworking. They're optimistic. Peter was fishing all night and he caught nothing. That happens to us a lot. There are days and days and days sometimes when we catch nothing. But you know what? We keep going out. We keep going after it. We keep hoping. We keep believing. And just a net itself thrown into the water, I think, is a profound act of faith.
As someone who has a great love for salmon, I thank you for your work.
That's good. As we continue thinking about following Jesus, where are we going? Are we going to stay in the water for our conversation today, or where do you want to take us?
Today, we're going to go somewhere further and deeper. And I want to back up a little bit and kind of remind us where we've been, because there's kind of a progression here. We started off with the calling of Simon Peter as a fisherman, calling him to follow Jesus. And Simon said yes. And all those other disciples said yes to following Jesus. So the question is then, okay, what happens after we say yes to following Jesus? And then we jumped into a storm, a massive storm. So we remembered this reality that saying yes to following Jesus doesn't keep us from all storms. But we saw that Jesus had power over the storm. In the last conversation, we looked at ourselves. What happens when we fail Jesus, when we fail to follow him? And I told you about a time when I unfollowed Jesus, when I denied him, and looking at Peter's denial and fleeing from Jesus on the night of his betrayal. Today, I want us to look at the power that Jesus gives us to follow him. It's an upside down power. It's not what anybody expected. I'd like us to read Luke 23, 32 to 34.
I've got it. 2 other men, both criminals, were also led out with him to be executed. When they came to the place called the Skull, they crucified him there along with the criminals, one on his right, the other on his left. And Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they're doing."
What we are faced with here is an image and a reality of the deepest possible failure and devastation. When the disciples said yes to following Jesus, they had a very different image of where this was going to go, of how this was going to end up. They had images of success, of course. What's going to happen when the Messiah comes? Everybody's waiting for the Messiah to come. We know what's going to happen. The Messiah is going to restore Israel. The Messiah is going to bring political power. He's going to bring military power. We're going to be back in charge. We're going to crush the Romans. The Romans are our oppressors. We're going to be back on top, right? Israel's going to be great again. This is what they were expecting. This is what they signed on for. And we jump to the end of the story, and we're met instead with this image of absolute devastation. The Messiah, rather than crushing the Romans, was crushed by the Romans. The Messiah, rather than triumphing over the oppressors, was crucified by the oppressors. So it raises a really big question. Wait a minute. We're following Jesus, and what are we signing on for here? And the crucifixion turns our notions of success, our notions of power, absolutely on their head.
Now, Leslie, if I'm following you correctly, it seems to me like we have a different challenge than they had, because we're on the other side of the resurrection and we know what happens next. But when they signed up, they didn't have that. And so for them to see Jesus arrested and taken away and to know that he's been crucified would have felt very different, it seems, because they don't yet understand the resurrection's coming. So how do you compare that with what we face?
Although, Bill, I would push back on that a little bit, because Acts chapter 1, Jesus died, he rises again, and the disciples' question to Jesus in Acts 1 is, all right, now must be the time that you're going to fulfill the expectations that we had of you throwing off the Romans, or whatever that picture. I mean, there was quite a spectrum of expectations of what the Messiah would do, but their expectation seems to come a little more clear in Acts 1, where it's after the resurrection and they're still expecting him to restore Israel.
And, the reality is that even today, I can slip into this formulaic thinking that Jesus is going to order my world, my universe, my country, my daily life according to, on a trajectory of upwards and to the right, that it's all about growing and it's all about increasing and it's all about what I view as success. And the reality is God is above all countries. God is above all people. God loves all of us and has plans that he's leading all of us to accomplish. And they're not always up and to the right. Many times they involve down and to the left, if you can use that analogy a little bit. And it's really tough to understand that. How is he going to use illness? How is he going to use poverty? Why doesn't he just fix all of this?
I think about the disciples, what their emotions and thoughts must have been as they see Jesus crucified, which is the most horrific, tortuous, humiliating death in the whole Roman Empire. Surely they were thinking, you know what? We followed the wrong man. He can't die on a cross. So there had to be this profound disconnect between their images of the Messiah and success and following him and what actually happened. And I think we experience that today too. I think we have expectations of what it means to be successful in the kingdom of God and what it means to be a successful follower of Jesus. Do you find that as well? What are some expectations that you have, spiritual expectations from following Jesus? I mean, don't you want to see your churches full? Don't you want to see people lined up to be baptized? And
yeah, I think I'm still kind of stuck on, I think we face the problem a little differently because we have more information than they did. But when it comes down to how you measure success, I think you're absolutely right. And I think some of it is because they were measuring success if I can use the word worldly, they were measuring success in a worldly way, political conquest and freedom. We in church world tend to measure success in a worldly way with numbers and growth and nickels and noses and all that kind of stuff. And so I think there is, when it comes to the success part of it, I can see the real correlation you're taking us to.
yeah, and I think the core issue here is, how does Jesus empower us to follow him? Where does this power lead? Is it going to lead to our churches being full, to, lots of baptisms, numbers, all of that? What is this power? And Jesus on the cross, his arms open wide, that image is ultimately, we know, it looks like weakness, but it's strength. It looks like failure, but it's triumph. The power that Jesus demonstrated and that he gives to us is the power to lay down our lives as well. And maybe that's not what we think we're signing up for when we follow Jesus. We want to be successful. We, have all of our kind of worldly images of success, but Jesus leads us to the cross. He leads us to a completely upside down measurement of success. This is what success looks like. We win by losing. We live by dying. The disciples were still after power. We see that when the soldiers come and they start fighting back, and Jesus says, lay down your swords. This is not the battle Jesus came to fight. And this is not how Jesus is going to win. He's not going to win with swords. He's not going to win with military power. He's not going to win with political power. He's going to win by laying down his life.
Yeah, this is the insight about following Jesus that flips our notions of success and power, as Leslie said, on their head. It's a completely different, counterintuitive way of living life. Well, we will wrap up this episode of the Discover the Word podcast with one more insight from a fisherwoman about following Jesus after this word about our next podcast. On the next Discover the Word podcast, Daniel will be building a 2-episode conversation around a quote from one of the earliest church fathers who lived around 130 to 202 AD, Irenaeus of Smyrna. He was discipled by Polycarp, who was discipled by the Apostle John, so it's not far removed from the time of Jesus. And it was Irenaeus who said,
"The glory of God is a human, fully alive."
Yeah, the glory of God is a human, fully alive. And so that quote will shape where our next 2 episodes will go.
And I've been really drawn to his quote for the past maybe year or so. The idea of being fully alive, and what does that mean, and how many aspects of my life at times don't feel fully alive. But I think it's good for us when we run across a quote that we really like that talks about God, for us to lay it against the scriptures and say, all right, is this just fortune cookie theology or something you'd find on a mug?
Right.
Or is this actually truth too? And there's a story in the scriptures where we're going to find Paul say something that's almost exactly being fully alive with God. So turn with me to Acts 17, and we're going to spend 2 weeks unpacking this chapter.
All right, Acts 17, and what it means for us to be humans fully alive. Join the group for that helpful conversation in our next 2 Discover the Word podcasts. And now, one more insight from Fisherwoman Leslie Leyland Fields about following Jesus.
Leslie, thank you for these conversations. I mean, I don't know many fishermen. I don't know any fisherwomen like you. So it's awesome to have your perspective, but to really be thinking about what it means to follow Jesus, what we run into, what fears we bump into. And actually, I'm excited to have a whole conversation about your story with Erin Eddy on God Hears Her too. So we'll get a little bit more of that there. But thanks for being here. Thanks so much.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. I love talking about fishing. Love talking about in all the ways that it really opens up the gospel to us.
I think your experiences resonate so well with Peter and the other disciples that were fishermen in their own country and in their own time, that it just makes for a lot of neat connections that I don't know that I would have ever really thought of.
Yeah, and I really wasn't that disappointed that your fishing experience is not like the deadliest catch. So, yeah, thank you for leading us this week. It's been great.
So we have one more conversation to have, and as we're considering following Jesus and what we bump into, where do you want to take us now?
I want to take us to this final moment between Peter and Jesus. And here's the question I want us to be thinking about. How can God ask us, me and you and Peter, how can he ask faulty, weak, imperfect, human, running away us to go out into the world to make disciples? Does God know what he's doing? Does God know who he's asking to be on his team? That's my initial question here.
Yeah, I think built into that question, right, is an assumption that we recognize that we are weak or faulty or running away types of people. And so maybe it's helpful for us just to remember some of our earlier conversations where we admitted that we don't have it all together.
You know, one of the things that I've learned the super hard way is that, Leslie, I tend to focus on what God wants to do through me for him. Okay? Like, I think, oh, that's the whole deal. But I've learned that he cares just as much, if not more, about what he's doing in me as what he's doing through me. And that's, I think, my answer. And it comes from a lot of hard lessons to this question of why would he choose us? Because, you know, while he does want to use us, it's us that he loves.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. It's us. And could we jump right now into the passage? Let's look at this moment when Jesus and Peter, and we've already been here at the breakfast scene, right? When Jesus brings bread and fish to the fire. And now we're going to go a little bit further to the conversation that Jesus takes Peter aside. So this is John chapter 21, 15 to 19.
Okay, I'll start it off. Verse 15, so when they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? He said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Jesus said to him, tend my lambs.
Verse 16, again, Jesus said, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And he answered, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. And Jesus said, take care of my sheep.
Verse 17, he said to him the third time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter felt hurt because he said to him the third time, do you love me? And Peter said to him, Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. Jesus said to him, Feed my sheep.
Truly, truly, I say to you, when you were younger, you used to gird yourself and walk wherever you wished. But when you grow old, you will stretch out your hand and someone else will gird you and bring you where you do not wish to go.
Then verse 19, Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. And then he said to him, Follow me.
There it is again. Right there it is again. Follow me. So we recognize in this passage that Jesus is giving the Great Commission to Peter. And of course, we don't forget, he's giving this commission to someone who has just denied and run away from him. And here's my connection to Peter. Here's our connection to Peter. Jesus comes to us and asks us to follow him in bringing the gospel to all of the world. And he's asking us, we who have run away from Jesus, multiple times, we who have failed him. And, from a human perspective, this is just craziness. And I think back to when I first started in fishing, I was given the easiest job. Okay, Leslie, you stand there and you hook the net. Okay, that was my job. And as time went on, I was given more and more responsibilities until sometimes I was running the boat, which was really scary. How could my husband entrust me with running the boat with a crewman under my charge out on the dangerous ocean? And I made mistakes all the time. I ran into the net. I, lost fish. My husband was asking me, calling me to something that was so hard that felt like it was beyond my abilities. And so just imagine that. Now here's Peter being asked to go into all the world with the most important news that anyone can bear, the news, the good news of Jesus, the good news of the gospel. He's entrusting that to Peter. How absolutely frightening that must have been. And yet this passage resolves and shows us the way forward for every single one of us.
How do you see that? Where do you see that?
Yeah. So it's this conversation that the two of them have. And the question that Jesus asks Peter is not, okay, Peter, are you ever going to make a mistake again? He didn't ask that. He didn't say, Peter, are you ever going to run away from me again? Peter, are you ever going to be overwhelmed with fear again? That's not what he asked. That's what I would have asked. That's not what Jesus asked. Jesus asked one question. Do you love me? And Peter's just, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. And most of us know that this is repeated 3 times, this exchange. Do you love me? Yes, Lord, I love you. And we see that as the restoration and forgiveness of the 3 denials. No, I don't know the man. Yes, I love you. So that's beautiful. And that's the healing and restoration. And every time that Peter responds, yes, Lord, I love you, Jesus doesn't say, oh, that's nice. Okay, now you're fine. No, he gives him a job to do. You love me? Okay, then. Feed my sheep. You love me? All right, then. Take care of my lambs. And the message is clear. Love is enough. Our love is enough. But I still want to say, wait a minute. Do you know what kind of love I have? Yes, I love Jesus. Yes, Peter loves Jesus, but it's not like your love. Jesus' love is perfect. It's holy. It's sovereign. My love, it's small. It's human love. It's finite love. It's imperfect love. Jesus, you're telling me that this love, this imperfect human, frail love that I have for you is enough to fulfill the Great Commission? And it is enough.
I'm reminded earlier in this gospel, the Gospel of John, Jesus in chapter 15, 11 times says, abide in me. And one of those is abide in my love. And so there's like this new covenant, this new promise, this new command that Jesus gives, which is to love others, but that flows out of first this love that he pours out on us and in us that, yes, brings reconciliation, right? Like he has with Peter, but then it also fills us, empowers, equips us so that where our human love continues to break down and fall apart and deny and run away. Christ's love in us is what can help us to love others the way that God loves us.
What a radical shift, from the Old Testament, where we were told to love the Lord our God with all our heart and soul and strength, etc., in our minds. And, the reality is we could never love enough. And that's what you're bringing up, Leslie. We're stuck in our not enoughness. But Jesus' provision on the cross, his invitation to abide in his love, his providing the Holy Spirit, he's answered us with himself so that now we are able to love him because he helps us love him.
Yeah, and Jesus is this God who is a God of multiplication. And we saw it right at the beginning, the calling of Simon Peter. Out of no fish, Jesus brings this explosion of fish. We see it in the feeding of the 5,000. Out of a handful of a little bit of bread, a little bit of fish, Jesus multiplies. That's what he does. He takes the little bit that we have to offer, and he multiplies it. So this whole question, what do I need to follow Jesus and to fulfill this awesome commission to go out into the world with the gospel? And I hear Jesus asking me, just like he asked Peter, Leslie, do you love me? I say, yes, I do love you, but it's just small love. It's just my small, imperfect human love. But it's okay. It's enough because Jesus' love will make my love enough. God's love will make our small human love enough.
Yeah, that is another great insight. Thank you, Leslie, for leading us in these conversations about what it really means to follow Jesus. This is the Discover the Word podcast with Elisa Morgan, Bill Crowder, Daniel Ryan Day, and special guest, author, and professional fisherwoman, Leslie Leyland Fields. We're wrapping up an episode called Follow Me, Insights from a Fisherwoman About Following Jesus. And at the beginning of that last conversation, Elisa mentioned the God Hears Her podcast from Our Daily Bread Ministries that she also hosts, and that they had Leslie on as a guest a few seasons ago. Well, I would encourage you to listen to that podcast. You'll get more of Leslie's story, and I think it would be a great follow-up to being part of these conversations on Discover the Word. So go to godhearsher.org and search for episode number 56, The Adventures of Faith. It's a great episode with Leslie Leyland Fields at godhearsher.org. And we'll also include a link to that episode of God Hears Her in our show notes for this episode. Now, we here at Discover the Word and Our Daily Bread Ministries are on a mission to fuel a Bible engagement movement around the world together. And as a donor-funded nonprofit ministry, it's your partnership that allows us to continue making the life-changing story and wisdom of the Bible come alive across the globe. And so if you'd like to partner with us financially, your support makes a difference. Just go to discovertheword.org and click the Donate button. That's up at the top of the page. Simply go online to discovertheword.org and click the Donate button. You'll see some options, and you can give right there. Thank you. And thanks for listening. I'm Brian Heading. The Discover the Word is provided by Our Daily Bread